All know in 2017 there was a report from the Legislative Auditor's Office that recommended a whistleblower program be implemented in order to provide safe harbor for county employees and the public to report issues and concerns without any fear. Last week, I had the opportunity to meet with HR Director Bill Brillante, Legislative Auditor Bonnie Nims, and Prosecuting Attorney Mitch Roth to discuss possible implementation of this program. And I'm sorry that Director Brillante is not here. He's actually on Oahu for negotiations. He, like many of us, thought committee day was actually tomorrow. So he is available to answer questions tomorrow if we have any. But I'm going to do my best to provide a recap of the conversation we had. A couple of weeks ago, we passed a budget amendment of $25,000 to fund a hotline that would be operated 24/7, 365. And that amount is based on what the city and county of Honolulu currently pays annually for an independent third party to take calls, categorize these calls, and route them to various agency conduits. There is a baseline cost for this service and then a cost per call. To put things into perspective, the city and county of Honolulu, they have about 1,400 calls a month that go into this hotline, at which point they pay $25,000. So based on discussions that I've had with Director Brillante, Bonnie Nims, and Prosecuting Attorney Roth, we've identified a potential process for how this hotline could be implemented. The hotline vendor would take calls, categorize them, and send them to a conduit that would be housed in the Legislative Auditor's Office. The conduit would be a new position whose primary function is to manage this whistleblower program, and they would take on other duties of the Auditor's Office as time permits. The conduit would review, categorize calls that are coming in from the hotline vendor, at which point the conduit will make determinations of what meets the threshold to be looked into. And in talking to Director Brillante, he noted that majority, 60% of the calls coming into the city and county of Honolulu's hotline had to do with potholes. So we would want to be able to make sure that this conduit is able to discern what is a legitimate concern versus something that is not something that's going to be investigated or audited. So essentially the determination between a pothole or misuse of county assets, for instance. The conduit would write a report with recommendations on next steps. And if there is a complaint that does not involve the county council, the recommendation would be sent to the council for review and discussion. If the complaint involves a member of the council, it would be sent to the executive branch for review and approval. This recommendation put forth by the conduit would include a range in terms of cost for the investigation or the audit. And so should the council or executive approve the recommendation, the Legislative Auditor's Office would contract with a vendor on our professional services list to do an investigation. I would like to beef up the amounts that we have currently allocated for the whistleblower hotline program that is currently housed within HR, but to pursue this pathway for a couple of years to see if it's warranted to hire on our own investigator, part-time or full-time. The conduit would provide a quarterly report of the kinds of calls that are coming into the hotline to the council, and the actual position title for the conduit is still being determined by Human Resources, and they would put forward a recommendation. Some other things that came up within our discussions, just in case these sort of things popped into your head, we would need to figure out how current HR and union protocols would be integrated into the review process, and also if there are any potential charter amendments or code changes that we would need to entertain. For instance, under the charter, the Legislative Auditor's Office does audits. They don't have the wherewithal to actually do investigations. So these are things that we would have to take into consideration as a council. I just first and foremost want to thank Director Brillante for his help with this, but also to a very dedicated county employee who worked very hard. Gabriela Cabanes, she retired in December, but she worked really, really hard to do research into this program. And so I just want to say thank you, Gabe. I know you're live streaming out there. At this point, I can answer any questions that my colleagues may have, but I just want I want everybody here in the public to know that we are keeping top of mind how we as a county can do better by the community. And by implementing this kind of program, we'll be able to increase government transparency and accountability and really find ways to help our operations run more efficiently and, most importantly, restore public trust. So with that, I yield.
Mr. Corneli Kleinfelder.
Is this meant for the general public to use as a hotline, or is this meant for county workers?
It's for both. So county employees and the public will be able to call into this hotline 24/7, 365.
For any complaint whatsoever in any form.
Say a county employee sees a coworker misusing county assets, they would be able to report that. Or if a member of the public feels that they were maybe being discriminated by someone that worked at the county, they would be able to report that without fear of retribution.
And just for the sake of saying it, is it not? It just seems a bit redundant, because I know we have other hotlines for many of the things, as well as existing whistleblower programs. For just a county focused, for county employees only, which I thought was the kind of the gist of what we were talking about before, to more of a broad public and county hotline, it seems that we're stepping on other programs that already exist.
Which programs in particular are you thinking about?
There's a federal hotline to call for whistleblowing. As a worker, I can call I forget the actual name, but there's a hotline I can call as an employee if I feel like my employer is withholding things that I'm due as an employee. There's just a lot of different agencies that we can use already.
So this recommendation, like I stated in the beginning, was put forth by the legislative auditor. And so by implementing this program, we would fulfill the recommendations put forth in that. And if we're going to expect that our calls and concerns are going to be handled by federal and state partners in a reasonable time frame, I think that's wishful thinking. So I think having something a little closer to home would be really beneficial.
And obviously our cost would be way more than $25,000 at that point.
So in preliminary conversations with Director Brilhante, he estimated that it would cost roughly $14,000 a year to contract a third party in order to handle the hotline, which leaves us about $10,000 left if our budget amendment passed. I am hoping that I will be able to work with Director Sacco to identify funds to beef up that account in the event that we need to pursue audits and investigations with a private investigator. It seems much more prudent and fiscally responsible to do it that way rather than to say, let's just create a new position and hire on an investigator. With that comes the salaries and wages and fringe benefits that we would have to factor in for years on out. So just having a couple of years where we can test the implementation of the program seems more responsible from a fiscal standpoint.
So there'd be a sunset date on the program?
The program hasn't even kicked off. We're just talking about possible implementation at this point. And I'm still going back to the drawing board with the responsible parties to figure out, do we have to introduce a resolution? Are there code changes that we need to do? Are there charter amendments that we need to entertain?
Okay.
It's a work in progress, and we want to capture anyone's issues or concerns so that we can really refine it and make this something that everybody can get behind.
I like the overall idea. I agree people need somewhere to go to vent or hopefully come with something very solid that they feel like they're not being heard on. My hesitancy would be just creating a redundant program that steps on other programs that exist already and creating something that we may not be able to uphold on our end without having a full-blown department behind it. Because how many calls did you say you're getting a month in Oahu?
Oahu gets 1,400 calls, but they have over 1 million people there.
Yeah,
our population teeters at around 200,000. So maybe a few hundred calls a month, but it really depends on how we take the next step as a county to address those concerns.
Okay.
I completely concur with Mr. Cornelia E. Kleinfelder's concerns from a fiscal standpoint. That being said, is it my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're the last of the 4 counties to implement this? Do I recall that correctly? Ms. Kirkowitz?
I know that City and County of Honolulu has a hotline.
Okay, so, and I do hear the concern from a financial standpoint. I do agree with you. Expecting county problems to be handled by the feds, probably it's an overreach, so need a little closer to home. I also like the idea of the sunset. We're talking about starting a program to see if it's going to work for us. And undoubtedly, it's going to have to go through a tweaking. So as we go through there, having some sort of metric to be sure we can tweak it once it gains some traction. So I like what I'm hearing, but I can appreciate Mr. Cornelia Kleinfelder's fiscal concern. I yield.
To walk back to a comment Mr. Cornelia E. Kleinfelder mentioned, there are, and I think it's the EEOC office, which is a federal discriminatory office, right? So I actually envision this as filling the gaps where it doesn't cross those types of thresholds at a federal level, but at least we have something a little closer to home. So with that, Ms. Kirkowitz, I really do appreciate you bringing this conversation forward and looking forward to future framework and more iterations of the program. With that, we have a motion to close file on Communication 300. All those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed. Clerk, we have 9 ayes.